Religion is poison. I said religion is poison. I said religion is poison. What you gonna do when they finally learn what you said ain't true? Religion is poison. It's poison in your blood. It demands a sacrifice that you don't have to give. Expects you to die so that you can live. Religion is poison. Religion is poison. Religion is poison. What you gonna do when you come to realize that what you thought ain't true? Religion is poison. Religion is poison.
We'll talk about starting off in the deep end. That religion is poison is derived as an expression or an interaction with Christopher Hitchen's book, God Is Not Great. How Religion Poisons Everything, which is the subtitle of the book. And that piece was just a little, you can hear all the symbolism in there, the chains of bondage to an ideology, the distortion of the traditional organ, which is usually used with choirs to uplift the spirits through the hymns and songs of praise in the Christian tradition. And I sort of bent that a little bit to make it ominous, minor keys instead of majors. And it sort of reflects the idea that, you know, what you think might have been non-toxic and positive might actually be toxic and not positive. Giving up your free will. Well, that's a Calvinistic term, free will. Yeah, to what extent have we lost free will if we embraced the dogma of the Christian tradition? Not just the Christian tradition. Again, I point out that any religious tradition that derives its source of meaning and or message from documents that you have to take at face value because there is no way to verify, to falsify the claims made in those documents. That each of these, whether it's Christian, whether it is Judaism, whether it is Islam, whether it is Buddhism or Hinduism, or even the claims of First Nations and their Turtle Island stories, all of which go into the realm of things that cannot be proved. And the rational person comes along and says, well, if it can't be proved, then what is the efficacy derived from belief, from suspending reason and leaping into faith with no form of support in terms of rational decision-making in that decision? So here I go off the deep end into two books. The one I just mentioned, the second one, which was The Chaser, I chose to read this summer, and why I'm catching up now, was by Richard Dawkins, called Unweaving the Rainbow, in which he would argue that science has come into conflict with religion because it is explaining things that traditionally you had to take by faith, not by science. So the ancient documents that talk about the origins of the earth, the cosmos, the things that we see and experience in our everyday lives, that these things are of divine origin. And science, since the scientific revolution, and perhaps even going back as far as the ancient Greeks and Egyptians, Persians, all the ancient societies that had some sense of order and structure and the beginnings of science and scientific inquiry, that they all suggested that there may be something else at work here on Earth. And so the history of science, the science as it evolved through the scientific revolution, the use of telescope, technology to unwind the ideas of the Earth is the center of the universe or the solar system, that the Earth is flat because the four corners of the Earth are alluded to in Scripture. You know, some of these things just don't make sense. And the classic one for me was men have one less rib than women because Eve was created from the rib of original Adam. Yeah, sometimes stuff gets filtered into dogma that has no place being there because it is by faith alone. And that used to be words that I would have aspired to emulate in my own journey in faith. Faith alone, Scripture alone, these things were hallmarks of the Reformation, these expressions. But I'm wondering to what extent they became simply another clank of a link in a chain being forged around people who were being kept under the authority of religious teachings. And of course, religious teachings were primarily, apart from if you delved into perhaps witchcraft, and by that I don't mean the negative black arts, but the herbalisms of witches and witchcraft in the traditional sense of women healers. Most of it's male-dominated. Most of it is authoritarian. Most of it is believe what I say and do what I do, and here's the kicker for me, without question. And earlier on in a few previous podcasts, I mentioned the formative book for me, David Dark's The Importance or the Sacredness of Questioning Everything. There should be nothing of faith that you want to shield from inquiry, from investigation, from scientific examination. But there is. And a lot of that stuff was hidden away, either through the church's practice of going and rounding up people and torturing them until you got a confession that was evidence of the change of heart, as in Galileo admitting he did not see the sun movement in orbit, or the Earth's moving around the sun. And his quote, "Nevertheless, I see," is one of those things, whether he said it or not, doesn't matter. The essence of it is what is real, which is we persecute those we disagree with until they confess, either at pain of torture or at point of death, that they were wrong. Unfortunately, as in burning of witches or throwing witches tied with rocks into the river, there's no way that they're going to float or they're going to burn. And what does that prove? Yeah, we thought a lot of things before the age of reason, before science. And some of the things have just crept up and are part of the baggage of rules and regulations, of laws that we have kept without going back over them and saying, should we, as in laws on the streets of Toronto, really have to be responsible for scooping your own horse on Yonge Street? In the days of the old Muddy York, I think some laws we've obviously gone past and they need to be revamped. Unless, of course, you are in the United States where, now forgive me if I get the state wrong, Mississippi comes to mind. You're in that state in post Roe versus Wade being overturned life, and you call upon a book of laws from, I'm going to change that. It's not Mississippi. It's one of the newer states, possibly Texas, maybe Arizona, before they became a state, had a rule about forcing everyone to comply with no abortions. 1864, I think, was the date of that law, and it's being called upon in 2022. And I'm thinking, why? Some of these things need to be laid to rest. The past is the past. Let's move on and look forward. And how do we do that? By asking questions about efficacy, about what point did these laws serve in their development? Why did people think they were good and necessary at the time? Well, but wait a minute. If you're in the States, you also cannot really teach history, because history might be full of references to how badly slaves were treated. And maybe they weren't just free labor. Maybe they're actually abused. Maybe they were subjected. Maybe they were persecuted. Maybe they were tortured even by their owners. Could it be even Jefferson? Maybe Lincoln had a slave. We need to ask these questions and not be afraid of it. And we need to sort of relish the idea that rationalism, skepticism, science, the scientific method are really the ways forward for an enlightened society. And that hiding truth away or hiding questions away by threatening people, by banning people, by ostracizing people, by kicking them out of whatever fellowship you are claiming rights to your own specific dogma, that these are the techniques of authoritarian structures that need no place in a modern world. The 21st century enables us to look back with a critical eye, with a skeptical eye, and say, I wonder how we got here in many of these traditions. Speaking of traditions, one that's seeming to come into play now is one called the trad wife. And I've just come across these things, so I'm exploring them, but I'm looking for what they have to say about what I'm exploring in my book, Uncertainty, the Grace of Uncertainty. Now I'm tempted, after having read The Unweaving of the Rainbow by Dawkins, to retitle the book The Unleaping of Faith, and how to get back into rationalism and skepticism as our guiding posts. Even if you want to retain your belief system, at least you have to have some rational basis for it, or it truly is beyond belief. It is simply a choice of faith. No basis for substance in that. I'm asking some hard questions, but you know what? It's really important to really ask them. And I'm thinking that in this, having read these two books and come to the conclusion that perhaps, religion is poison. Perhaps religion does get in there and poison everything, whether you're talking about the IRA, the wars in Northern Ireland, whether you're talking about Sri Lanka and the Tamils there and the Hindu versus Buddhist wars. I mean, violence? Buddhists? What about Buddhists in Tibet? Were they guilty of violence too? Is there some way in which everyone has been jaded, poisoned by the religion of their day? And perhaps we need to take a look at that. One of the things I found interesting is the notion of blood, and why a loving, kind God seems to arbitrarily decide that blood is important, and that a sacrifice using blood is necessary for one's redemption, salvation through blood. Through any blood? Well, the Old Testament full of animal sacrifices. Abraham was going to sacrifice his son, so I'm thinking there was already some kind of ancient tradition of sacrificing children. Abraham's gesture with his son Isaac is just an example. I mean, really? To pile up your logs and do this as if this was a normal kind of thing? And yeah, I'm having questions about that, and whether that translates into questions about Islam or all ancient religions and their claims. I'm not sure how far I'm taking it at this point, but the notion that religion is poison is becoming an interesting thought to mull over. And there are lots of examples to support the way, even in modern society, the 21st century, that religion continues to present itself as a toxin in society as a whole. And we can see this in the great divisions in society. Not just divisions, I'm going to say this as a flippant thing, but divisions between Catholics and Protestants, which has been since the Reformation, but divisions between people who espouse the same faith, and people who are supposedly Christian but acting in ways that are anything but Christian. People who support Trump as my president, who is a known, demonstrable liar, but Christians follow him. Why would you follow a liar when lies have nothing to do with the truth or the light, but people do it? So I'm wondering all of these things, and that is where I'm going in the next section of the book. Sort of not just a pop culture look at ways in which religion has been tainted and is now toxic to culture, but ways in which we need to revisit some of the traditions. The traditional wife of the 1950s, Father Knows Best, the Stepford Wives, whatever it is, we need to look at it for what it seems to be, more obviously now, authoritarian structures, male-dominated, and question. There is a sacredness to questioning everything. And so I'll leave that with you. Is religion poison? I'm tending to think there are a lot of ways in which we could examine that question, and the answer would all come back to various levels of toxicity. Yes, religion is a poison. It can also do good, and we need to be able to separate the two. Maybe motivation, like considering an act a crime, the motivation might be the big determinant. If your motivation is pure, maybe you can live by the faith you choose to embrace. If your motivation is not pure, as in many people wanted to convert other people, considering them to be the mandate, go out and baptize. You gotta go out. It's a command. And so you don't have choice. Where there's no choice, there is authority. Where there's authority without question, there is the danger of toxicity. Toxic masculinity. That's a word that's coming out more and more. Yes, I think there's a lot to question in our unleaping of faith. There's a lot of grace to be had and enjoyed when we are not as dogmatic, when we are willing to reflect and examine our suppositions. All right, that's it for now. I'll leave you with the rest of the song, Religion is Poison. Ominous. Next section of the book, The Grace of Uncertainty. All right, take care now. Bye-bye.
Changes you instead. Your religion is poison. I said religion is poison. Religion is poison. What you gonna do when they finally learn that what you said ain't true? Religion is poison. Religion is poison. What you gonna do when you come to realize that what you thought ain't